Just whenever.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so a little bit more about Freud. This time, a couple of years later. Hannah, when was the book released?
1899.
Yeah, so later. In the circle, that's Freud, and then we got G. Stanley Hall and Jung. They were also pretty significant for the event that I'm going to talk about, which is Freud at Clark University in 1909. Just remember those faces for now. A little bit of context, it was the 20th anniversary of Clark University, for which G. Stanley Hall is the president, and he just wanted to have a big event, and then the main attraction turned out to be Sigmund Freud, who was 53 years old at that time, and it was just the turning point for psychoanalysis, and for better or for worse, a new epoch in the history of ideas began. In the timeline of psychology, we just got the magic date right there that we have to remember. First psychology lab in Germany by Wilhelm Wundt. Remember the name for a later story. In '83, then in the United States, the first lab, which was by G. Stanley Hall, the president of Clark, who also then founded APA in '92, and then here we are in 1909, the 20th anniversary. The protagonists for this presentation are obviously Freud. At the time of the conference, he wasn't actually that famous. The book that Hannah just presented just sold like 100 copies, so it seemed a little arbitrary for Freud to be invited, but it was actually because G. Stanley Hall, he was a big fan of Freud's findings, because he was also very keen on sexuality in human development. G. Stanley Hall, he was the one that released that super big book on human development. And then here we got Carl Jung and Jean-Claude Ferenczi, but they don't really matter for this presentation. They just tagged along with Freud, although Jung was a pretty big deal too, but they just made their way with Freud over the ocean because, you know, there weren't any flights at that time over from Europe to the US, so they had to go on a big, long flight, ride in a boat. And then 26 other scientists also presented, but I'm not going to talk about those. Not in the picture is Wilhelm Wundt, because G. Stanley Hall here, he invited him, and then Wundt said, no, I don't care about the 20th anniversary at all, because it just doesn't matter to me. There's a 500-year anniversary going on over in University of Leipzig, so I want to talk there, and I don't really care about your anniversary. And he was actually offered $750. He said no, not going to do that, and that led to a second invite to Freud, because Freud said no to the first one, and they just upped the money, and then Freud said yeah. And then he was very excited. He told Jung, I must admit that this has thrilled me more than anything else that has happened in the last 3 years, that I've been thinking of nothing else, so he was very excited to go. And then he just talked. He had 5 lectures overall. The first one was about Anna O. We talked about her a little bit on Monday. She was the patient with hysteria who got treated by Joseph Breuer just by talking through it all. You know, according to Freud, it was the most successful that hysteria has ever been treated. He then talked a little bit more about those treatments in the second lecture. He just said there's the conscious approach, which is talking through it, and there's a subconscious approach, which could be hypnosis. And then the third lecture was free association and dream theory that Hannah just touched upon. And free association is you close your eyes and then you just talk about whatever pops into your head. And he said that dreams aren't arbitrary at all, and that this free association can be used to look into your subconscious and about how your mind really works. Fourth one was psychosexual stages. I think we all know about that one from about like 3 psych classes already. And then the last one was about social and cultural aspects of sexuality, because he said the way that society is approaching sexuality just makes us sexually repressed and as a main cause for neurosis and mental illness, so we gotta change the way that we look at sexuality. What did it lead to? It was a pretty big deal overall. The first symposium afterwards, in the same year, pretty much all the papers that were presented just touched upon what Freud said, and it wasn't like everybody supported his findings, not at all. It was pretty divided already. A lot of criticism, but also a lot of support. So it just shows the wave that it kind of created. In March of 1910, and 1 year later, the International Psychoanalytical Analytic Association was founded, and then the American Psychoanalytic Association. They were both founded, just all because of what Freud talked about. And then 2 years later, interesting, is that G. Stanley Hall, the one that invited Freud because he was such a big fan, he expressed disbelief in Freud's theories. In a letter he said, yeah, I tried my best. I used this knowledge that you presented on my patients, but I disagree with it all. I don't think it makes any sense. This sexuality is just, you kind of over-exaggerated the importance of it all. But against most psychologists' wishes, the public really embraced Freud's ideas. They, in the 1920s, they all just thought that it was very sensible and that it should be acknowledged by the psychologists, and then they were somewhat forced into acknowledging those parts, and then they just looked at parts that seemed compatible, for example, the importance of early childhood experiences for the rest of your life. Freud's experience, though, was not good at all. He hated the US with a passion. He said it was a gigantic mistake, a miscarriage, a bad experiment, and some other really harsh words. Later on he said, yeah, maybe that was because I had some physical distress. He had an inflamed prostate and appendicitis and some other unpleasant experiences. And his friendship with Jung also ended because Jung said, yeah, listen up. He had this whole quote with the chicken and an egg. He said, I know I'm the egg and you're the chicken, and it doesn't make sense for the egg to really talk back to the chicken, but at some point, whatever is inside of the egg got to creep out, and my theories just make more sense than yours. So then Freud couldn't handle that criticism and ended the friendship. To round it all up, it was the only visit that Freud would ever make to the US, the only time he would ever lecture there, and it was for the 20th anniversary of Clark University. And the 5 lectures really accelerated the whole movement of psychoanalysis and lasted a very big impact. And this one wasn't in Europe prior, because they didn't really care about what he had to say. And it also marked the friendship between Freud and Jung, who got along really well, but then didn't anymore. And that's it. Questions? Professor DeClude?
Thank you. So what do you think would have happened if Freud had not come to Clark University? What do you think would have happened with his theory?
I don't think it would have spread as much, honestly. I think the big push came from the US, and maybe it's because it didn't have as rich of a history, and just some wild theories weren't as embraced in Europe as they were over here, because it was such, I don't know, fresh material, and maybe there was much more in Europe. So maybe I wouldn't be talking about it right now. Professor DeClude.
Thank you so much. I love having the floor. Why do you think this particularly marked the end of Freud and Jung's relationship? What was it about this particular trip that was the kicker?
I mean, maybe it was, first of all, Freud didn't have a pleasant time at all, and so maybe if you're on edge, then some criticism from your best friend and maybe even lover, there were some wild theories about those two. He didn't handle it well at all, so then, I mean, he was always more of an insecure person, so then if you're the person that matters the most to you in the scientific field, says, I don't think all of whatever you say is as godly as you make it out to be. Maybe that's what.
Yeah, that's good speculation. I'm not so sure about the lover part. I've heard that too, but I don't know if there's a lot of evidence for that.
They talked about psychology for like 13 hours when they met, so they really hit it off.
Well, talk about psychology for 13 hours with somebody?
No, we don't know what kind of psychology they talked about.
This is a good time to say, great job, Bee.